Your work typically blurs a lot of boundaries, be that between figuration and abstraction, or sculpture, painting and drawing, or the imagined and physical spaces. How would you personally categorise your work or describe it or place it perhaps art historically, or is that something you try to avoid doing?
Yeah, this is a question you're sort of always asked, I suppose, at every moment when you're writing a release for an exhibition, or, you know, I'm kind of framed in multiple contexts all the time, in a way introduced to new artists through it that might be considered my inspirations, but actually, you know, sometimes I come to them after the fact from a different angle. Like, I think you'd probably have to add to drawing, sculpture, painting, you'd have to add architecture, collage, you know, like I suppose it's sort of to do with line and form, being able to kind of connect in a way to sort of have this emotional resonance as much as anything. And, you know, and I think Clive Bell's theory of significant form would perhaps kind of describe that thinking, but it's not obviously as simple as that. And for example, I was put within this drawing sculpture exhibition probably close to a decade ago now at Leeds Art Gallery, before I had a solo show there. And in that exhibition, you know, positioned next to Sheila Clewitt and Naylor, and I was aware of Clewitt, and people had kind of said to me, look at Sheila Clewitt, look at Sheila Clewitt, and I didn't really fully until I was in an exhibition beside her. But in a way, that was the work that was kind of framing my very linear work at the time. But in a way, I suppose the context that I feel more comfortable being positioned within are to do with within my own experience, you know, the context of my own experience now. And I think I sort of, there's a tension in the work. I think so. If I'm framed in one context, I almost sort of think of it in a kind of contrary way. On the flip side, I tackle sculpture from the position of painting, and vice versa, tackle painting from the position of sculpture. I suppose my kind of confidence is dealing with objects. And I think at CAMPLE LINE, it's an exhibition of objects. There's a lot that's painterly there. There's a lot that's linear and to do with drawing in space. But with objects, you're asking for that kind of, you're inserting the viewer in the work, you're incorporating the viewer in the work. And I suppose that's where I feel like, you know, if there's a power in my work, that's it.
So maybe you've kind of already answered my next question, which was that I know you've talked before about raising the question of what is sculpture, and I wanted to know how you would answer that yourself.
When I sort of think about a line, you know, a drawn line, I would describe that as an edge rather than a line. To me, it's the building up and doing and the activity of a thing rather than something being experienced from outside. You're very much within the thing. So I suppose I think you're kind of asking the question of yourself all the time, moment to moment, while you're making something, trying to make a line exist in space, approaching something sort of from the edge of the thing, trying to sort of tie, bind, glue, braze two things together. You know, even sort of drawing things and interspersing them with made things, and all of this sort of materiality. You're kind of asking all the time, is this sculpture? Is this sculpture? Can I see behind it? Is this sculpture? It's like a kind of constant moment to moment sort of activity where, yeah, that it's sort of very physical, and it's part of your engagement with it and your experience of it. It is very human, I think.
Can you talk a little bit more about your process of making? I mean, do you make maquettes? Do you know in advance how you want something to end up looking, or is it a case of constantly trying things?
It's changed a bit. So in a way, I'm really used to giving an answer to this, which is that it comes out of painting and I deal with the surface first. And then there's a sort of collaging, there's a sort of dissatisfaction with the surface and a kind of editing process that happens where there's a bit that I really like, or there's a bit that I want to sort of take out, and then I can be sort of playful within that, and I'm liberated away from all of those things about making composition work the first time round. But I suppose I started to have a bit more sort of foresight about what that trajectory might be within my own process, and kind of a bit more self-knowledge. And so then there were kind of different approaches, and not always the same approach, not wanting the same outcome, so wanting different things to happen, wanting to be sort of surprised in the process. But I suppose one process that's really relevant for the last show I did at CAMPLE LINE, that I usually make sort of a first draft of a thing, which is like the sketch, out of rougher materials. So out of cardboard or plywood, I'll make a kind of container, usually that's the sort of the hard structural fixed part of the work that ultimately will be very fixed and very made out of metal, or has been to date. That's sort of the container for my process of thinking and sketching and collecting, and it all kind of lives in there. And I sort of got to that point from, sort of feeling like there's these two sides of my nature, where I sort of need to be strict with myself and have these things that are fixed in the work, whatever they might be. I mean, I can change them, but it takes a really decisive and deliberate and willful action to sort of cut up a piece of metal. And then, that becomes a kind of environment for all of the other painterly expressive stuff that I want to do. And that's the bit I enjoy in the main. And this, can be more intuitive, I suppose, or more personal, or go in all sorts of directions. But so, yeah, to answer the question, it's that first version, which is cardboard, and it was roughly bound metal and material. And it's the second interaction with all that stuff, where there's a slower process of brazing, where everything has to be very clean and decisive. And I always felt like that sort of marriage of those two things was the kind of healthy relationship that made me live with work, that kind of silenced the very critical voice that would have a constantly evolving work with many possible endpoints. But there was that kind of fixed nature of those materials that made me sort of settle on a final work.
Mm-hmm. And am I right that you've included some of these initial works in the CAMPLE LINE exhibition?
Yeah, that's right. I sort of I referred to them as exploratory works, and that's what they were described as in the press release. And I was thinking about that, like trying to be honest about what that was. And I think it was lots of things. I think a part of me was thinking that I was exploring the area. My work isn't always site specific, but you can't really avoid thinking about the specificity of CAMPLE LINE. The building is sort of an object in the exhibition. It's like just the biggest work in the exhibition. It has, this really kind of vivid palette of colour, which is like kind of mosaic walls and natural materials, but it becomes, I suppose, in your memory much more vivid, and the kind of corrugated sort of red oxide farm building rooftops. And it was sort of exploring that, I suppose. So I think I had, the vocabulary of my making that was kind of reaching out of the last exhibition I did at Leeds Art Gallery, and thinking, okay, what's the natural evolution of this, and what can I take out of that, and what's still unresolved, and what do I still need to do? So it was a part of that I wanted to do in the exhibition. There wasn't about CAMPLE, and then there was this really strong force of CAMPLE that was unavoidable. And I suppose a part of me thought, in making exploratory works, I was in a way sort of avoiding making a decision, so downstairs I saw as a work, as a floor at CAMPLE LINE that very much connected with the materiality of the buildings, because you walk right in from the noisy kind of gravel, and just having seen those kind of materials of the buildings and the sound of the river. And it's quite a low gallery space as well. And so I wanted the materials to have that kind of the palette and the sort of the tactile relationship with outside, and to kind of glisten and be seen in that low light. So I sort of thought from the start that would be the floor that would really connect with everything about CAMPLE. And, you know, ultimately that happened upstairs as well, but in sort of different quiet areas where I like sketched out the window at some of the brickwork, and that came into some of the works. But it was sort of concerns that I've been interested in the work anyway, rather than absolutely led. And I also thought, you know, it had started to feel really far away because I was making the work in lockdown. And the journey, I always found that journey to CAMPLE quite sort of turbulent. I get really car sick, and it's really this kind of kamikaze route, or how I drive, this kamikaze route down to CAMPLE. And I felt like you wanted to, if I was going to ask people to go and see a show, you know, from Glasgow where I am, or from wherever, from out of the region, you'd want to have a kind of layered experience of an artist's practice. So not just the complete result work, always the work that I like in an exhibition or in an art monograph or something, is just seeing that direct intention that you get through sort of seeing the investigative drawings, or the model making, or looking at Eva Hess, for want of sort of answering that first question about kind of placing historically, looking at Eva Hess's models and seeing something frail and poignant, you know, and sort of feeling, I suppose, by calling them exploratory works, that I could do that without fully committing to them as absolutely resolved, I suppose, leaving them open and feeling that was interesting, but that there would be questions that I hadn't answered, actually.
You say you were making a lot of the work during the first lockdown. Were you constrained in any way by that? Could you get to your studio, or?
I could at the beginning, yeah, I could get to the studio at the beginning, but it was more that sort of circumstances, looking after family and things, made it really difficult to get into the studio. And then I was sharing a studio with someone, and then you don't really, you can do that either in a pandemic. So, and you know, and it was probably in parallel with quite a strong desire of mine while to work at home, almost to try and make the work come to me a bit more. I've always felt that I've worked sort of a bit peripatetically anyway. There's always been a big exertion where I make work somewhere, but I can't really see the work until I move it, and sort of trying to, in short spaces of time, get distance from work's always been a thing that I've really tried to do. And it's and there's always been a sort of battle of you know, using toxic paints or materials that need cut with particular tools in workshops. There's always been that sort of exertion, and I kind of thought, you know, I need and want the work to fit more into my life, and into all of the pockets of time that I have available to me. Like this strange sense where time was really, it felt endless at times. It felt like there was too much time, like time was had a longer duration. There was a really strange sense, and yet none of it available, like filled with the stuff of just sort of existing, kind of keeping the family on an even keel, and just sort of you know, the house kind of equipped with stuff. And it's quite hard to remember what it was like actually now. And I know, like, I had it much easier than a lot of other people, but just even in terms of kind of planning to get a material, or, you know, the stuff that came really easily before, all of that seemed to take longer. So there's this strange sense of just a really slow movement of time, and time became like a real symbol, like a timepiece came into the work as well, you know, where I was sort of having to make in the bits of time where I normally wouldn't make, I suppose. I don't know that I've particularly ever suited the 9-to-5 work, but I've definitely forced myself into that mode of working, because that's, you know, that felt a sort of healthier relationship to work somehow, and it fitted with what other people do and kids, childcare, and all that stuff. But really, what I like to do is to absorb what happens in the work more slowly, and to see and understand scale and relationship in relation to the domestic and, you know, just the objects around me, and see it in different lights, see it in early morning, work on it when I've got an idea, whatever time of night that is. And I've always thought that kind of private working, you know, like you know, 20 years ago, art school, trying to sort of creep in early to the building when nobody else was there, but still strangely, you need to, or I felt that you almost need to seek privacy from yourself, strangely. So in that moment of time, also in the bigger sense of lockdown, I think a lot of people gave themselves permission to do stuff they wouldn't do otherwise. Yeah, that you can sort of use that to kind of take the work somewhere, because whatever happens, it was just in the night, or it was just, you know, it's just in that moment of time. So the expectation isn't immense.
Do you think you'll try and carry on some of that way of working even when we get to whatever the new normal might be?
I mean, I have got a huge work downstairs that's taking up all of the kitchen walls. So, you know, in a way, I've already sort of made something on a really huge scale. So, but I think I've learned a lot from the process. And I don't think I'll go back to a studio 9-to-5 day. And I'm sort of trying to make a proper studio at home. But I think I'll probably, you know, I suppose the sort of notional idea of what studio means to me has changed. And I don't know if I actually could have got to the point any earlier in my practice. You know, it sort of took a bit of the practice had to exist in a bit more of a sort of fully fledged way for me to understand that the bricks and mortar of studio wasn't as important. But I think the space to look at work is still really important, because I can sort of work in my garage or a bit outside, a bit here and there and in the attic, but I can't really see it, and I need a work in relation to another work. So so I think it's to do with that thing that I said about making work come to me, understanding what I need from it, and bringing it at the right moments, the right places, and working on it in the right moments, and understanding that doesn't mean working on it necessarily all of the hours, just finding those right moments, you know, because I wanted, in a way, for it always to have fitted in and been a part of all of my experience, because then it feels like all of those kind of mundane and profound moments of life can be part of it and can act on it. And also it's easier, you know, like, and it feels there's that value, there's that kind of relevance of the stuff that's that we all engage with, just on a really human level. One of the works, or a couple of the works downstairs, my collage loads of tinfoil to sort of replicate metal. Like, I'd made the wood maquettes, and then, you know, normally I'd try and get as close with a maquette to a finished work as I could, to understand then what I was going to make and the kind of final materials. And I really felt like a child, you know, sort of making a Christmas decoration or wrapping something up with silver foil in order to make it feel so special and embellished. But it was just stuff around me, and I was kind of working on the kitchen table, and there's something very natural about that. And then I needed that part of the process, but I also needed the other part of the wider art context that connects me to, you know, the gallery and the audience, that then makes me go, oh no, I'm going to peel this away and you know, and start to bring in all of those other kind of readings of the work, and pour the paint, which was this kind of red oxide connected to and I was deeply trying to connect to the buildings at CAMPLE, I think, that then started to remind me of the, like, a sort of decomposition of the kind of natural environment in the area and stuff, other things at work. And so I suppose it felt like another layer of narrative and another thing for me to react against, and another tension in the work.
I mean, you've sort of touched on lots of different strands and threads there, and I'm wondering what role fragmentation generally has in your work, if at all, or is it more about tensions and dissonances?
Both of those things, I suppose. I think for other people experiencing the work, tension is probably the thing that's quite present, because you hit upon barriers to your experience of the thing, and so perhaps that's felt more by others than by me. I mean, in terms of fragmentation, I suppose it's a structural thing that is to do with kind of collaging, I suppose, as I see it, because I've always been interested in art and the literature that I sort of saw went alongside that. So imagist poetry, and I've always liked, I suppose that's been my kind of starting point with language or literature. I mean, there's always lots of words that kind of float around a piece when I'm making it. I'm sort of reading a lot, and books are out, and words kind of enter in and out of my thinking around a work, and sometimes so normally I'll sort of use all of that language in a way, thinking of it as being sort of poetic, and I have included kind of whole poems in exhibitions, or perhaps poem is is going too far. I don't know that they're poems, but collections of words in a form. But here, because of there being sort of so many small works, I just reduced right back to one word, sort of the most important word, which was a kind of active doing word that seemed to sort of it seemed to talk about that tension, about that kind of human interaction with a work, which so some were like dart or mouth or pull, or they seem to kind of ask for that kind of human interaction, and then you can sort of put them together as well, and see a sort of I wouldn't go as far as a kind of a narrative, but you can see a dialogue, I think, between the pieces through that, and something physical, and where one piece reaches out to another through that.
And I guess that idea of reaching out and human interaction has become kind of even more key this year with everything that's been going on.
Yeah, definitely. I know it's been quite strange to think that there hasn't been as much sort of physical experience of that work either, because of that, because it is very tactile, and to think that actually we're seeing a lot of that through film or photographs is quite strange in a way. I suppose it will have another life after that. There's a kind of there's a direction in a way. The works are sort of there's hands in the works kind of pointing up, and there's a work called Climb that's like a sort of small staircase that's on the ground floor that sort of directs you up. So in a way, when you see those works in isolation, there isn't that sort of active engagement with the space. So I suppose that kind of just further demonstrates our need for that experience of work